Assalamu alaikum and welcome, dear students, to the seventh session of the distance learning program of the Current Affairs Newspaper Breakdown session. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most important, bloody, and yet neglected conflicts in the world in general and in the Middle East in particular. The impoverished desert country of Yemen has been in flames for nearly 6 years now, 5 to be exact. If we look at what has happened in the Yemeni civil war in the last 5 years, we have lost 500,000 children to hunger, to poverty, and we have nearly had more than 100,000 casualties of the war itself. And there's a brink of famine in Yemen, which has already claimed hundreds of thousands of lives and threatens the entire 8 million population of Yemen. There was a cholera outbreak in 2018 and 2019 in Yemen, which also claimed thousands of lives. And the infrastructure and institutions and the state of Yemen has been completely destroyed and ravaged by the continuous war. Besides that, very dangerous forms of terrorism and terrorist organizations and the most violent outfits of Al Qaeda and ISIS have taken deep root into the Yemeni society because they have had a free reign to operate within Yemen, and they've had a safe sanctuary and breeding grounds to gather their forces for terrorist attacks, not just in Yemen or around the region, but in the entire world. So, how did we get here? That is an important question. And why do you not know about it? And why does the media not give it enough attention? And what are the different stakeholders in this civil war? And what have they done to achieve their stakes? And what is a possible future of the Yemeni conflict? These are all important questions. And these are some of the questions that we are going to try to answer today. So, in 1990s, the Shia minority of Yemen organized themselves into a sort of a rebel insurgency group by the name of Houthi rebels because they claimed that their rights were not being provided for by the central government of Yemen because they were a minority and they were being systematically oppressed by the Sunni majority government and the populace. And their legitimate human rights were being butchered on a daily basis, which is why they banded together to start a sort of insurgency against the government and the established order in Yemen to safeguard their human rights. They weren't really a big organization because they did not have a lot of traction, and the Yemeni government never felt much threatened by the Houthi rebels up until 2011 when the Great Arab Spring started. So, as far as the Arab Spring is concerned, we're going to have another lecture on the Arab Spring, and I'm going to explain to you what that is and what kind of implications that had, is having, and will have into the future. We'll also talk about what is the second Arab Spring, but in another lecture. So, for now, when the Arab Spring started and there were mass uprisings all over Middle East, the Houthi rebels really gained a lot of momentum. They became an important power broker in Yemen, and they started mass agitation against the established internationally recognized government in the capital Sana'a. And these mass agitations started to become violent. And in 2015, it erupted into a full bloody blown civil war between the Houthi rebels and the internationally recognized government of Yemen, which was heavily supported and dictated to an extent by the Saudi Arabian establishment. So the civil war started in 2015, and if you look at the map of the Middle East, Yemen is located right in the backyard of Saudi Arabia. And the Houthi rebels are basically Shia in their religious outlook. And we know that Iran has been exporting, or at least making efforts to export its religious Shia revolution all around the region ever since its 1979 Iranian revolution. And it has achieved that in a number of ways, in a number of places, and that is exactly what Iran tried to do in the case of Yemeni civil war as well. So there are a number of reasons why Iran got involved in the Yemeni civil war. One, because it was in the backyard of Saudi Arabia, and Iran wanted to create an unstable situation close to the borders of Saudi Arabia to put national security threat on Saudi Arabia and put economic burden upon the economy of Saudi Arabia for fighting that war, and to build a potential proxy group for Iran in Yemen, like it has in the form of Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Palestine, and a number of other Shia militias in Iraq and in Syria and other places as well. So the Houthis started the invasion against the democratically elected and internationally recognized government, and they actually quickly overrun them, and they drove the government out of the capital Sana'a and conquered Sana'a and much of the northwestern Yemen. So the government then, moved the capital and rushed to establish their ground on the port city of Aden. So now there are two capitals, contested capitals in Yemen. One is in Sana'a, which is controlled by the Houthi rebels, and the other is in Aden, which is the democratically elected government headquarters. So in this civil war, there are naturally two sides to the conflict, but the conflict is very complicated and it has had a long history to it, and it is already having a lot of spillover effects all over the Middle Eastern region. So as far as the two sides are concerned, on one hand, we have the Houthi rebels, which are supported by Iran. And on the other hand, there is the internationally recognized government, which is supported by a Saudi Arabian-led international coalition, including Egypt, Jordan, UAE, Bahrain, and importantly, the United States of America. And Saudi Arabia has sought to defeat the Houthi rebels in the civil war in order to return to the pre-civil war status quo, where the internationally recognized government was established in Sana'a and it had law and order and complete hegemony over the entire country. The Houthi rebels, on the other hand, obviously want to establish a new order. So one of the main ways in which the Saudi Arabian government has helped the government in Yemen is through their massive air campaigns and air support, where their airplanes and warplanes have dropped many different degrees and kinds of bombs over alleged Houthi targets and other targets within the Yemeni area. And we must understand that in this war, the Saudi Arabia is heavily supported by the United States, or at least it was until 2019. And as far as United States support for Saudi Arabia is concerned, this support is historic. It goes as far back as to the World War II and the emergence of a new bipolar world order in the post-World War II scenario, where Saudi Arabia became the anchor of the communism containment policy and the regional hegemony of the United States in the Middle East. Ever since then, the United States have sold a lot of weapons to Saudi Arabia. As a matter of fact, right now, Saudi Arabia is the largest importer of arms from the United States. Secondly, the United States administration has helped Saudi Arabian government or the present order and the rulers in the form of the House of Saud to maintain their power, to maintain their monarchy, and to increase their regional clout and maintain their regional alliances and serve US interests in return. So one of the main reasons why Saudi Arabia has been such a large importer of arms from the United States is because of the overwhelming threat that Saudi Arabia feels from Iran. Even though Iran has not imported any advanced weaponry from any country to the extent that Saudi Arabia has. But anyhow, the regional Cold War between Saudi Arabia and Iran has pretty much shaped the regional calculus of the Middle Eastern region. And that's very much true in the case of the Yemeni civil war as well. So let's do a stakeholder analysis in the civil war in Yemen. Let's talk about the government in Yemen first of all. So the democratic elected government of Yemen wants to return to a pre-civil war scenario, a status quo where the government has complete control over Yemeni sovereignty, and it is the de facto ruler of Yemen, and it is directly allied with Saudi Arabia, and its foreign policy and regional interests are dictated by the Saudi Arabian administration. Now let's talk about the stake of the Houthis. So Houthis, as a resistance group to the brutality and the suppression that was caused by the Yemeni government towards the Shia minority, basically want to establish a new order where the Shia's rights and their freedoms and their access to Yemeni wealth is safeguarded constitutionally so that they get to have an important and sizable share in the government and the power structure of Yemen. I think this is the ultimate objective of the Yemeni Houthis, because naturally they can't expect to, establish a Houthi only government in Yemen because they're a small minority. So let's talk about the Saudis. So the Saudis feel that their national security is compromised by a civil war going right in their backyard, and because Yemen has a long border with Saudi Arabia, and the fact that Iran is directly involved and supporting and funding the Houthi rebels. Saudi Arabia particularly feels threatened by this aspect of the civil war because it presents a conundrum for Saudi Arabia, where Saudi Arabia has been able to create conflicts all around Iran to destabilize it, but it has never happened in the past, ever since the Iranian Islamic Revolution of 1979 and its complete 180-degree turn in foreign policy, that Iran has been able to destabilize Saudi Arabian borders. But now it has to an extent achieved that by creating more insurgency and by adding more fuel to the fire of the Yemeni civil war. So let's talk about Iran now. Like I've said, Iran has various interests in the region. So when Iran emerged as the Islamic Republic of Iran in 1980, after the Islamic Revolution of 1979, led by the famous Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, Iran was in a very precarious situation because everywhere around the region it saw only enemies. No friends, no allies. Every state around it wanted to undo the revolution and return to a pre-revolution Raja Pahlavi status quo, which was very beneficial to regional players such as Saudi Arabia or Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Which is why there were consistent efforts by many countries in the region to destabilize Iran and to undo the revolution and to overthrow the government and basically effect a regime change. But somehow Iran managed to overcome all of these efforts, and the regime change never happened, and the Islamic Republic and the Islamic administration is still in power and gaining more and more momentum and strength and regional clout every day. So in an effort to increase its alliances around the region, what Iran has been doing ever since its revolution is trying to export its own revolution to other parts of the world, especially to those minorities in different parts of the world that are A, radicalized, and B, their radicalization is due to their suppression and systematic persecution by the majority of that country. You can take the example of Hezbollah, you can take the example of Hamas, you can take the example of the Shia militias in Syria or in Iraq, right? So due to this very particular reason, Iran has been trying to build up its alliances through supporting insurgencies and insurgent groups all around the Middle East. And that is exactly what Iran did in the case of Yemeni civil war as well, by supporting the oppressed and the minority resistance movement, you can call it, or insurgency led by the Houthi rebels. Iran is trying to build another proxy group, another pro-Iran group within Saudi Arabia and Middle East, and trying to establish a new order in Yemen, which is more pro-Iran than it is pro-Saudi Arabia. And finally, the United States. So the United States has kind of acted as a policeman of the world ever since the World War II, and it has safeguarded the security interests of its allies through active deployment of its military and active involvement in the regional military, political, social, and economic affairs all around the world, which is why it was able to establish its global hegemony so as we speak. So Saudi Arabia is an old-time ally of the United States, and they share the vision of Middle East between them, and United States have historically helped Saudi Arabia to maintain its grip over power and hegemony in the region, and supported the Gulf Cooperation Council in order to create an anti-Iran bloc within the region to contain the rapid emergence and the success of the Irani regional efforts to make a sort of Irani stronghold within the Middle Eastern region. Which is why the United States' support for Saudi Arabia in the coalition against the Houthi rebels was meant to contain the increasing militant, insurgent, and political activities of Iran to increase its regional clout. So, in the case of Yemen, that was obviously by building the Houthi rebels as an important power broker in Yemen and the greater Middle Eastern region. So, this is part of the United States' maximum pressure campaign, so to speak, as and this is especially true after the election of Donald Trump and the withdrawal of the United States from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, also otherwise known as the Iran nuclear deal. So, due to these estrangement between the United States and Iran, the United States' efforts within Yemen to counter an Iran-sponsored and an Iran-supported Houthi rebels have only heightened. In that, the United States have sought to provide air support, weapons and arms and ammunitions, and logistical and intelligence support to the Saudi-led forces and invasions against the Houthis in Yemen. And this is naturally also related to the United States' oil interest in the region, as is one of the primary reasons for the continuous support of the United States of Saudi Arabia and their anchorage, so to speak, in the Middle East. So, another important objective that the United States has in the Yemeni civil war, which is to an extent shared by other regional power brokers as well, including Iran and Saudi Arabia, is to not allow the Yemeni soil to become a breeding ground for international and catastrophic forms of terrorism such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And, in order to achieve that, the United States have done a lot of given a lot of support to the Saudi-led coalition in the form of tanks and airplanes, the F-16 and the very strategic tank BF-60, and a couple of other supports as well. So let's discuss the different dimensions of the Yemeni civil war. So essentially, I think there are 7 dimensions of the Yemeni civil war. First of all is the Arab Spring and how the Arab Spring led to the Houthi rebellion and insurgency in Yemen. So the Arab Spring was a number of massive public uprisings in much of the Middle East against established monarchies and autocratic and oppressive rulers whose only concern was to maximize their own wealth and not the well-being of their people. So the people rose to overthrow them, to bring a new order, albeit to a large extent the Arab Spring failed to achieve its objective, but it initiated a number of civil wars, for example, in Syria and the case in Yemen as well. So the Houthi rebels saw that with effective mass mobilizations and public support and public agitation against the government, things can change. The status quo can be changed. And this gave them a lot of confidence, which is why they became more assertive in Yemeni politics and started to come onto streets on a massive scale, armed to the nail, right? So the second aspect, obviously, is the Iran-Saudi rivalry. So you have to understand that the Yemeni civil war can also be seen in the context of the broader proxy warfare and competition for dominance and hegemony that is going on between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which is directly related to the very state creation of the two regional powers, in the sense that the Islamic Republic has been created to cleanse, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been created to cleanse the world of 3 important demons or terrorists that Iran has identified. Number 1 being the United States, number 2 being the Israeli mammoth, and number 3 obviously the House of Saud, which the Iranian administration claims has unlawfully captured the holiest sites of the Muslims, and the holy sites of Muslims do not belong to them. Right. The third dimension, is the efforts of the United States to contain the rising influence of Iran, its ballistic missiles program, its nuclear program, obviously, and its increasing support for a number of proxy groups and militias all around the region in order to ramp up its efforts to create pro-Iranian regimes all around the region. This includes obviously the US actions against the Al Quds Force, the murder of Qasem Soleimani, the withdrawal from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Actions, and the reimposition of international very damning economic sanctions. So, all of this is a composite package of the maximum pressure campaign, as dubbed by the US President Donald Trump, in order to bring the Iranian economy and the Iranian Republic down to its knees to force it to agree to US demands, which are a number of demands, such as recognition of Israel as right to exist as a sovereign state, to give up its ballistic missiles program, to support its non-state actors and nefarious anti-state activities all around the region, and to become a more basically US compliant and US puppet sort of state. That is what the US wants Iran to be, which is the only case in which the US will stop its subversive and anti-state activities in Iran if Iran agrees to basically get dictated in its foreign policy by the United States. The fourth dimension is the international humanitarian crisis that has been created in Yemen, which is on a massive scale. So the cholera outbreak, as I told you before, already claimed thousands of lives actually. The famine has already claimed nearly 500,000 lives of children and hundreds of thousands of adults as well. The water shortage is emerging as one of the most complex and potentially destabilizing problems within Yemen, where people do not even have access to basic potable drinking water. And naturally, the refugee crisis that has been generated by the Yemeni civil war is only worsening. So one of the primary reasons for the very massive and daunting humanitarian crisis that has been unfolding in Yemen for the past 3 years at least is the international blockade that was imposed by the Saudi-led coalition against the Houthi rebels by closing off all important trading ports of Yemen, thus closing Yemen to all international trade and creating food shortages, water shortages, essential medical supply shortages, essential vaccines and treatment kits for the cholera virus. So all of these things have been compounded by this blockade that was created by the Saudi-led coalition to hamper the efforts of Iran basically to help arm, support, train, and fund the Houthi rebels within the Yemeni civil war. The fifth dimension are the many and various and very gruesome war crimes that have been committed by Saudi Arabia in particular in the Yemeni civil war. So Saudi Arabia, using its air force, has decimated and attacked schools, universities, hospitals, and even a funeral procession that killed nearly 150 people in one strike. So there has been increasing pressure in the International Committee of Organizations and Justice Departments and the International Court of Justice and the UN to bring the perpetrators of the crimes against humanity in Yemen to justice. So the primary perpetrators, as has been identified by many non-government organizations working within Yemen to give relief and support to the Yemeni poverty-stricken desert people, is that the primary cause of this massive humanitarian crisis is the Saudi blockade, the Saudi attacks and warring efforts within Yemen against the Houthi rebels. And finally, the sixth dimension that happened in 2019 is the US withdrawal from the Yemeni civil war and support for the Saudi-led coalition, which was done by the US Congress. It was a bill that was passed by the US Congress, which basically vetoed Trump's ability to move US into the Yemeni civil war deeper or pull US out of it as he wills. So the Congress passed a bill to inhibit Trump's ability to do that, because the Congress was very ashamed about the many stories of crimes against humanity that were coming out of Yemen and the massive refugee crisis and the massive humanitarian crisis that international organizations such as the World Health Organization, such as the UNICEF and other food programs all around the world were really concerned about, because it was becoming a sort of a Holocaust situation for the Yemeni people. So, in this very complicated war, civil war in Yemen, the future holds uncertainty above everything else because there has been a lot of infighting between the government forces and, on the other hand, between the Houthi rebels themselves. So, initially, when the civil war started, the president of Yemen, Mohammed Saleh, was actually allied with the Houthi rebels. He wanted to support them to bring a new order in Yemen, which was free of corruption, nepotism, and massive government irregularities and incompetence that the previously internationally recognized democratic government had. So it had a bad track record, which is something that Mohammed Saleh and the Houthis aimed to change. But during the civil war, as sides changed and as new deals were signed, Mohammed Saleh cut himself from the Houthi rebels and joined the government forces and became their friend. So we are not really sure what is the future of the Yemeni civil war because it is still going on. But we know this for a fact that the perpetrators of the crimes of humanity against humanity that have been committed in Yemen and the Yemeni civil war must be brought to justice, and international organizations such as the United Nations Security Council and the International Court of Justice must make sure of it because it is their responsibility. Secondly, the Yemeni civil war has had the worst impact, and the worst orphans of this war have been the regular population of Yemen, which has been so dramatically hit by the civil war that they do not even have food to eat for 2 days. And perhaps in the present age, it is a tragedy indeed that despite having so much excess food in the world and so much food waste happening all around the world on a daily basis, the Yemeni people were sleeping without their food, without their stomachs having anything to digest. This is a sad reality indeed. And thirdly and finally, Sweden and other Scandinavian nations and the United Nations Security Council have tried time and again to reach some kind of ceasefire and then some kind of political settlement and a political process within Yemen multiple times. But all of these efforts have been, laid to waste for a number of different reasons. Much of those reasons were basically the infighting and the disagreements between, the warring sides themselves. So no one can say what the future holds for the Yemeni civil war, but one thing is for clear: if it keeps on going, the Yemeni people will keep on suffering more and more every passing day. And this is becoming increasingly true after the COVID-19 pandemic that has spread. So, in the greater interest of humanity, I believe that warring powers around the world must halt their efforts, their campaigns, their violent campaigns, and try to do something about the COVID virus and unite on this international pandemic. With that, I thank you for listening and for having important information. Links are present in the video description below. So remember to do see more down there. Thank you very much.